Welcome to the Collide Kids Podcast, hosted by Christen Clark. This is a show for kids and families. You are going to meet new people and have fun while you listen. Let's do it!
Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Collide Kids Podcast. I'm your host, Christen Clark. The Collide Kids Podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. It means so much to me that you are listening today. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to stick around to the end of every episode. We have a new segment we're calling Let's Talk About It. It's a fun time where we're going to ask some questions, 3 questions to be exact. Now, they might be silly or imaginative or faith-filled, but the goal is just to spark some really great family conversations. So stick around to the end of the interview for that, and you and your family can have fun talking about what you heard on the show today. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you're like, hey, whatever happened to the kids only segment? Well, we didn't get rid of it, but we have moved it to our YouTube channel. So if you still want to be on the show on the kids only segment to share your favorite Bible verse or joke or song, then you will be featured on the YouTube video version of an episode coming up soon. So I'll share some more information about that at the end of the episode, how you can send those videos to me and be on the next episode. Well, I am really excited to introduce you guys to my friend Valerie Ellis, who has written a children's book about different modes of transportation. And so I thought before we get to that interview, we'd play a little game together. Is that okay with you if we play a game? And I think the game should be all about different modes of transportation because let's face it, it's just so fun to talk about that kind of stuff. So this game is called Real or Made Up. I'll describe a different mode of transportation and you have to guess if it's real or made up. Then I'll reveal the answer and a fun fact. Are you ready? Let's go. Here's the first one. The hover bike, a motorcycle that hovers above the ground like a flying drone. Is that real or made up? You can shout your answer. Well, if you guessed real, you are correct. Some companies like in Japan and the US have built working hover bike prototypes. So maybe we'll see that soon. All right, here's the next one. The snail train, a super slow train powered by actual snails. If you guessed made up, you're correct. Can you imagine how patient you'd have to be to ride on a snail train? All right, here's the next one. The maglev train. A train that floats above the tracks using powerful magnets. Is that real or made up? Real. You're right. A maglev train exists in Japan and China and can go over 300 miles per hour. Wow, that's fast. All right, here's the next one. The bubble submarine. A tiny personal submarine shaped like a bubble for underwater travel. Is that real or made up? Yes, it's made up. You're right. But wouldn't it be fun to explore the ocean in one of those? Okay, here's a fun one. The jet suit. A suit with tiny jet engines that lets a person fly. Is that real or made up? I feel like I've seen it in a movie, but actually it's real. Companies like Gravity Industries have actually built jet power suits. Wow. All right, here's another one. The solar car, a car powered completely by the sun. Is that real or made up? If you guessed real, you are correct. Solar powered cars exist and some can travel long distances using only sunlight. But here's the question. What do you do at nighttime? It's probably going to be tough to drive through the night. But okay, here's the next one. The moose bus, a giant bus pulled by trained moose in cold climates. Is that real or made up? It's made up. Moose are strong, but they're not exactly public transportation strong. Okay, here's another one. The amphibious car, a car that can drive on land and float on water like a boat. Is that real or made up? You're correct. It is real. They're actually amphibious cars, and some people even use them for fun. All right, we got a few more. Here we go. The monowheel. A single giant wheel that a person sits inside to ride. Is that real or made up? If you guess real, you're correct. Monowheels have been built and ridden, though they're not very common. That might be true. Okay, here's another one. The hot air boat. A boat that floats just above the water using a giant hot air balloon instead of sails. Is that real or made up? Well, it sounds real, but it's actually made up. I feel like they could do one of those, don't you? It would be a pretty wobbly ride, though. Okay, now here's the bonus round. It's the last one. This is for all the points. Are you ready? The ice cream truck boat. A boat that sells ice cream on the water instead of on the road. Is that real or made up? It's real. In some places, there are floating ice cream trucks that serve treats to people on boats. I wonder if they have those on the lake that we like to go to. We need to find out about that. Well, how many did you guess correctly? Now, let me ask you, would you ride any of these? I think I would. Keep listening because we're about to dive into a fun conversation about transportation with today's guest. Her name is Valerie Ellis. She is a children's book author who loves helping kids and parents connect with God and each other in the everyday moments. She's also a speaker and the founder of Our Everyday Parables, an online resource with book reviews and ideas for families pursuing faith and compassion. Valerie lives with her husband, Josh, and their 2 sons in Houston, Texas. She enjoys live music and going on adventures, big and small, with her family and friends. I think you guys are really going to love this transportation conversation with Valerie Ellis. Well, Valerie Ellis, I am so excited to have you on the Collide Kids podcast today.
I'm thrilled to be here, Christen. Thank you.
Yeah, this is so fun. I'm so excited to talk with you about your book. Would you just introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, I am Valerie Ellis. I'm a children's book author and the founder of Our Everyday Parables, which helps families connect with God and each other through books and everyday moments. I have 2 kids that are 14 and 10, and we live in Houston, and we love to go on adventures together. I love music, and of course, books are a big part of my life.
Yes, and we love children's book authors here at the Collide Kids podcast. I get to talk to a lot of different people about their books, and I love how everybody has such a different passion or different thing that's interesting to them, and that comes out in their book. So we're definitely going to talk about that today because your book, I think, is so cool. But before we do that, because this is a show for kids, I always ask my guests to tell me a joke or something funny. So what have you got for us today?
Okay, here's my joke.
Okay.
What happened to the man who took the 5 o'clock train home?
I don't know.
He had to give it back.
That's true. He couldn't take it home.
He couldn't take it home.
I like that. That's good. Okay. So speaking of trains, would you just tell us a little bit about this book? It's called Let's Go Bible Adventures, and it's all about transportation in the Bible. How did you come up with this idea?
So this goes back to my own kids. When they were young, they loved vehicles, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners do. Construction trucks and cars and planes, and we just had all the books about that. And it was so very fun. But my oldest, when he was like 2, he was actually so in love with cars that was the only kind of book he wanted to read.
Yeah.
And as a mom who loves Jesus and thought maybe we could read something about God.
Right.
I reached a point where I was like, how could we work transportation into these Bible stories while staying true to the story, but still getting the kids' interest because cars and trucks are just so fun. So I was thinking, well, there is transportation in the Bible. It just doesn't look like ours does. So what if we ask silly questions and compared the modern and ancient transportation? So for example, Jonah went on a journey. He wasn't listening to what God said. He fell into the ocean. And did God rescue him with a submarine?
No.
So what did God do?
So it's definitely not a submarine.
Definitely not a submarine. But then kids get to turn the page and see the real story and hear what God did and how great God is and all about his love and faithfulness. So that's how we worked it in. So to stay true to the story, but also have a lot of fun reading as a family and just asking those silly questions. And honestly, letting kids be the smart ones and be like, no, Mom and Dad.
Yeah.
It wasn't a garbage truck. It wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't a Jeep. So
yes. And it's so true that kids, especially younger kids, we're obsessed My kids definitely were. We had books about garbage trucks and the little red truck, the little blue truck. There's all these trucks.
Truck.
And then every time we drove past like an excavator, they're like singing the theme song from whatever, so
Yes.
I think one of the first times my son in the backseat, he was like 3 years old. He was like, "That's an excavator." And I looked at it and I was like, I don't even know if he's right, but he probably is. 'Cause I need to look. I need to start studying transportation. So is that what you did? Did you start studying all the things about transportation and about all these different vehicles? Or was it something that you started looking at the Bible first?
So both. And I love your story, Kristen, because my kids definitely trained me which was the backhoe, which
Right.
was the excavator. And, they would correct me if I got it wrong.
Right.
And then they grew up and got out of that phase. Whereas I still stayed obsessed with it, where I was just like, look, it's a semi with an excavator and a backhoe. And they'd be like, Mom.
Right. They're on their devices like, what? I didn't even see
what?
anything.
I wasn't even looking. Or like, I wonder how many train cars they are. And they're like, we don't do that anymore. But now I've written a transportation book, so I have a legitimate reason to be excited again about trains and things like that. So, both and. So I did start with, in some stories, knowing which transportation item I wanted to have, because knowing what kids love, like garbage trucks, and then looking and saying which story could go with that. But then other times it started with the story, and I was like, well, I definitely know I want to include this story. Like, let's say, for example, the 3 wise men, they had a long journey to make, but could they have just shipped their gifts? Could they have sent it by
Amazon?
delivery?
They couldn't send it through Amazon,
They
could they?
couldn't do that. So, things like that. So like with the garbage truck story, it's actually a bit of a lesser known story that we included, which this book has a lot of familiar favorites, but we also wanted to include those lesser known ones just because there's so many great stories in the Bible. It's hard to cover them all. And so in that story, Josiah realizes that people are not being true to God. They're worshiping idols. Does the garbage truck take out the idols? No, but the idols do get removed and people's hearts turn back to God. And so kids get to turn the page and see what really happened.
That's great. And I do love that story about Josiah. I think that's a really great story for kids to learn about. It is one of the lesser known stories, but he was a child and God used him in a great way to be a king for his people and turn them back to God, like you said. So that's really cool that you included that one. I like that. Tell me, what's your favorite story of all the stories that you pulled together? What's your favorite?
That's such a hard question, and I'm going to cheat a little. Some of my favorites are favorites because of the mode of transportation or because of the rhyme or because of Carolina's beautiful illustrations. But I'll pick one I love, and it's when Jesus feeds more than 5,000 people.
Okay.
That one uses a food truck. And I'm from Houston. So, did he call a taco truck a barbecue truck? And then you turn the page and it's like, no, a boy shared his lunch. Actually, that miracle started with a child as well. And so it's the story about God's power and strength and how Jesus fed all the people.
That is so fun that you're including all these stories in the Bible and connecting them to things that we're seeing all the time, like a taco truck, which that makes me hungry right now. It's lunchtime, so I need to go.
It is.
I need to go see if there's a taco truck in my area. Let me ask you this. How can a book about trucks and rockets help kids learn more about the Bible? Like, is this really going to help kids connect to the Bible? Like you said, they're going to be like, no, Mom and Dad, we know the answer. But how does this help them connect with the Bible?
That's a good question. And as a mom, I looked at a lot of books and some of them I was like, that's cute, but is it going to really help? So I really put a lot of intentionality into the book about that. So not only is there the 8-line story about the Bible in rhyme to interest kids, but there's also a fun fact at the end of each one. And some of them relate to cars and are just for fun. But a lot of them relate to the story either to offer a little bit more detail or relate to another story in the Bible to try to connect and help kids see God's big story.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of jumping off points, where parents could talk more about it. And then each one ends with a refrain that, I hope that kids and families will read together as they are reading the story. And each one ends with, we're on an adventure with God. Let's go.
I love that. And I love how you included those fun facts. So if you've got kids of all different ages, your whole family is going to enjoy this book together, but you're also going to be able to dig deeper if you have kids that want to dig deeper, or if you have kids that are just now learning, they're going to be excited to see the excavator and the food truck and all that stuff.
Yes.
So that's great. And I love that you put intentionality about helping people to look back at the scriptures, because that's what we need to be doing.
Yes. And each story has the reference to where parents or older kids can look up the Bible story and read it from the Bible.
And I love something you said earlier, too, about helping parents and kids get more out of that time of storytelling. Because like you said, we're looking for stuff like, I wish it would go deeper. I wish I had more that I could share with them, especially if we're trying to be more intentional about discipling our kids and teaching our kids about faith. So how can we do that? I mean, I know we could get your book, but are there other ways that we can get more out of that story time?
Yes. And that's one thing we love to talk about at our Everyday Parables is, that we are, as humans, are wired to learn through story. And there are all kinds of books, some of them written specifically about God, and others, are written about other things, but we can still find echoes of God's creation, God's care in them. And so one thing I love to do with books is, talk about them. As people, but especially kids, we learn a lot better when we're processing out loud versus just hearing from someone else's perspective. And so one question that we ask at our house sometimes is, where did you see God in this book? And that can be used with a wide variety of books, because it could be something from his creation that stood out to us. It could be something about his love or even his precepts. Like, I see that character, didn't follow God's precepts, and then what happened? Or it could be something like, I see this character showed love in a really, sacrificial way. And even if we can't come up with something, that's okay, because what I tell parents and what I tell my kids is, it's just good to get in the habit of asking, where are we seeing God? And we're building that habit so we can become more aware of his presence in our everyday lives and our reading. And, we're not always going to have an answer, but that's okay.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, creating that habit of just asking that question, when you start with stories, which are so fun to read when your kids are younger, then as they get older, you can ask them to look at something maybe in their everyday life. Like, what's something that you saw God do today? Or how did you see God at school or, on the sports field or whatever? You can always ask those questions. So training them to think that way and to look for God, I think, is a really cool concept and a great way to get them started when they're younger.
Exactly. And, there are other questions you can ask with books too that can open up great conversations. Like, well, what's your favorite line from the book? Or what's your favorite picture? Small things that can lead to some good conversations.
And I was thinking too, there's parents out there thinking, okay, not all of the books that I'm reading have to do with the Bible. Or sometimes we even read books to our kids, or we'll get halfway through and realize, oh, there's something in here that we don't agree with, or there's something in here that I don't really want to talk about with my kids. But we can also have those conversations. You know what? This is something that we believe, and we're going to stand up for that, or we're not going to talk about that right now because that's not a part of who we are as a family. And I think that's okay too.
Yes. And sometimes that's a good opportunity to talk about things that you wouldn't normally think to mention to your kids about, like, what are our family, how would we react differently in this situation because we are children of God?
Right. Like, I have a friend of mine who they try to avoid books and movies where the kids are disrespectful to adults or to their parents. And she's like, that's something that's really important to our family. And so they have that conversation. You know what? We're not going to watch this movie, or we're not going to finish this book because we don't really agree with how the kids are interacting. How do you think they should be interacting with the parents or whatever? And so just having those conversations instead of just slamming it down or throwing it away or whatever, and like avoiding it, like you said, keeping those conversations going, letting kids ask questions. I think that's really important for just your family dynamic and knowing that it's safe to ask those questions.
Yes. Definitely want to be that safe place where kids don't feel like, oh, mom's going to get mad or dad's going to, whatever. But to know that, like, we can talk about anything in this family. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And that's very important, especially as your kids get older. So we want to have those conversations even at a young age. So that's good.
On our Everyday Parables, we give a lot of book recommendations. And so I think it's really important that parents, when you can, like, preview the books if you have certain things that you don't want to see in your books because we're all different.
Right.
And whereas I might read a book like that and use it as an opportunity to talk, you might be like, my child's not ready for that because they're mimicking everything that the characters do in books,
Right.
And so I totally respect that. And it always encourage families to, definitely do what's right for them.
And I'd also love to hear a little bit more about Everyday Parables. What is that? I love that you guys do book reviews. What is the premise of Everyday Parables, and how did you get started in that?
Yeah, so as I started journeying to become a children's book author, because that's not something that I had planned to do before I had this book idea for Let's Go Bible Adventures, I was reading a lot of kids' books and reading a lot of books with my kids and just loving it and just wanted an outlet to share that with families. And then as we did, we, also linked in the everyday moment. So just giving families easy ways to talk about God and help kids see God as relevant. I mean, God is everywhere in our day, kind of like we've already talked about, whether we're linking to it through books or maybe something in nature, or maybe even like as I'm erasing this whiteboard, I am reminded of God's forgiveness. And I'm so glad that God, just washes away everything that we have done and loves us so much. It could be as simple as that. So we give parents, kind of practice in developing that skill of finding God in the everyday moments. And then, like I said, the book reviews too.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great resource for parents and just needing some encouragement or just to know like what to do next and how to have those conversations. I think you guys should definitely go check that out. Okay, I want to ask you a more personal question. What was your favorite book as a child?
So I love this question. I get asked this question a lot now that I've become an author. No one was interested in that before.
No, like, tell us.
Tell us. So, and maybe this will encourage some kids and parents. I was a good reader, but I just wasn't obsessed with books, and yet here I am as an author. So you never know, where the path will lead. If your kids aren't super into books, that's okay. There are a lot of other great things that they can be interested in. And I do though remember one book that I loved, and that was The Sweet Smell of Christmas.
Oh, nice.
It's a scratch and sniff Christmas book. And I know it's February now, but I also wrote a Christmas book called Share the Joy, a Christmas Lift the Flat book. And I think a lot of it came out of my love for The Sweet Smell of Christmas as a child. Because if you're not familiar with the book, basically a bear goes through all of the Christmas traditions that we still practice. It's an old book because I was 3 when I first read it. But we still, do the hot cocoa and the Christmas tree and the caroling. And so little bear goes through all these things. And I realized when I was an adult and doing my own Christmas traditions, like those were all the things that I wanted to do to check off to make, this is a happy Christmas because we had hot chocolate and I put an orange in the stocking, just like little bear had. So, I think sometimes those books can really get into us, and definitely came out with Share the Joy, because Share the Joy is all about Christmas traditions and how we can expand them to show love to others as we celebrate Jesus' birth.
We'll be right back after this. Raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
That's awesome. I love that. I think it is true. Like the books that you read as a child, they get inside you, like I loved Little House on the Prairie. Like I read all of those and that's why we do an orange as well. That was the only Christmas present that little Laura got, but I love that. Well, and I think it's so fun too, to think back to all those books that we held dear as a child. Like when my parents were moving into a new house and they had all these like boxes of books. I'm like, don't get rid of this one. They're like, why does that mean it? I'm like, I just love that book. I remember it, So it's fun to go back and think about those things. Well, I am so excited about your book, and I'm excited about our readers getting a hold of your book and learning more about this. So yes, let's go Bible Adventures. I think this is going to be so fun. Tell us where we can find your book, where we can order it, all the good things.
Well, it's available wherever books are sold, and you can connect with me on my website and get some freebies. So there's an activity pack for the book that's perfect for little ones. They can start doing some car activities with things that you have around the house. So they're very, very simple, and they have 18 biblical truths that you can just talk about as you play. So they're very playful. You don't need the book to do them, but it's just a really fun way to connect with kids who love vehicles.
Yes.
And so pretty much anywhere you can find a book, you'll find it.
That's great. We'll have that in the show notes as well, so they can find that activity page and get a hold of that, because I know that's going to be a lot of fun. Well, Valerie, thank you so much for being here today and being on the show. Before I let you go, I always ask my guests to tell me a memory from when they were a kid. So I can't wait to hear yours.
Yes. Okay. So I actually struggled a little bit with this. I love your podcast, Christen. So I knew that this was coming.
Thank you.
And I, not the one in my family who typically remembers all the things. So I was like, I should call my sister and get her to tell me about my life.
I do the same thing. I call my siblings. I'm like, I need a story from my childhood. Can you remember anything?
Yes. But just talking about reading and family conversations, this came to mind. When I was little, I grew up in church and we listened to a lot of hymns. And, some of those words are hard to understand, hard for kids to understand. And I remember from the song At Calvary, there's a line that says, "There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary." And for some reason, as a kid, I thought they were talking about a bird and a sole of a shoe. And I was like, well, that's weird. I wonder why that's in the song. But oh, well, I guess grown-ups are a little weird sometimes. So I guess, kids, ask your parents if you think something sounds weird in a song, because it might be something completely different.
Or you'll wait until you're like 25 years old and you'll see the karaoke, the lyrics go up on the screen and you're like, I've been saying it wrong for 20 years now. You had no idea.
Yes.
No one told me.
It happens. Definitely.
Yes. Yeah. Kids today don't know. I think I've shared this in another episode. We had the little boom box and I would record things from the radio.
Yes.
So you just had to guess what it said, unless you had the CD that had the lyrics in the back of the CD sleeve. Yes, I loved learning about what the word. That was the only way. We couldn't look it up on the internet.
Well, and because I would have been too embarrassed to ask my friends, what does that say?
Right, exactly. You're like, I guess this is what we're singing about in church today. Okay, that's great. I love that. Well, Valerie, thank you so much for being on the show. This was so fun, and I am so excited about your book. So thank you for sharing today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Wow. Did you guys know there were so many different types of transportation in the Bible? I love when Valerie was talking about creating those habits of asking questions after we hear a story or read a book or watch a movie, asking these questions that our family can talk about, like, how did you see God in this story? Or what are some ways that we see God in our everyday life? So that the whole family is thinking that way and looking for those things in their everyday life. I just love that encouragement. She also said, do what works for your family. There's going to be some things that work for some families that don't work for others, and that's okay. You guys do what works for your family and keep faith a part of your conversations. Younger kids really do have such a great fascination with different types of vehicles and transportation. I mean, can you imagine what those Bible stories would be like if they had modern day vehicles in them? Like Adam and Eve with a tractor, or Noah on a cruise ship? Or I love when she was sharing about the food truck when Jesus fed the 5,000. There's so many different Bible stories that have been reimagined and are going to spark some great conversations with the Let's Go Bible Adventures book. So head over to Valerie's website, valerieellis.com, to purchase your copy and learn more about Valerie and her books and get some fun freebies. I know you're going to enjoy those. Well, now it's time for some fun family conversations. So let's talk about it. Here are the 3 questions that you and your family can enjoy chatting about. You can pause after each question, or maybe just keep these in mind and have a conversation around the dinner table later. Here's the first one. What is a type of transportation that you have never been on? I know we can think of a lot of ones we've been on, but what's a type of transportation you have never been on? All right, number 2, what does it look like to be on an adventure with God? Use your imagination and think about that. What would it look like for you to be on an adventure with God? And number 3, where have you seen God in your life today? Maybe it's in the sunset or just the fact that you woke up this morning. Maybe it was a song on the radio or listening to a really great podcast that is fun for the whole family. Where have you seen God working and moving in your life today? Talk about that with your family and make that question a part of your everyday conversations. I know you'll get a lot out of that. Well, if you would like to be on an upcoming episode for the Kids Only segment, I would love to hear your favorite Bible verse or joke or a fun quote or a story that you love to tell. Just head over to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and click the tab that says Kids Only, or you can find information about how to send it to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod, and I would love for you to follow me there. I'd also love if you would share today's episode with someone you might think needs to hear it. That's such a great way for more people to learn about the show when they hear from other listeners. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Collide Kids Podcast. That's pretty easy to remember, where you can watch the full-length interview for today's episode. You know, a great way to support any podcast is to leave a rating and a review. And so if you enjoyed today's episode and you want more people to find out about the show, then head over to your favorite podcast app and leave a rating and a review and let people know what you think. It also lets me know what you think, and I enjoy reading those and getting that encouragement for you. It also really does help other people find the show when people leave rating and reviews. So thank you for doing that in advance. You can also share this episode with friends and family, or you can go by my website and click the link that says support. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. As we carry on this ministry, it's so important to share God's love and stories of people who are doing amazing things. And so I appreciate those prayers as we continue to minister to families together. Well, I am so thankful that you listened to today's episode, and I hope that at some point, maybe today, maybe this week, maybe this month, you can go on an adventure with God. In case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids Podcast.